I bid you welcome or welcome back. This will be a really low effort video. I only have a time lapse for you with voiceover, so I won't stall for any amount of time. Like many of my creations, this one started out as a random, hey, that sounds cool kind of idea. See, my works have never been in an exhibition before. Shocking, I know. Not even my traditional works have seen the light of day aside from being shown to some random people online and some being included in the designer course portfolio I recently made. This time I got a suggestion DM'd to me by a family member from the first website that has ever existed, Facebook, about a semi-local exhibition that will also include digital works, any works really including video and performance art as long as they meet the criteria. Also, when I say semi-local, I mean 200 kilometers away, meaning even if I'll be somehow included, I'll never get to be there in person, but still. I hate to brag, but definitely my digital works are by far my most presentable creations, so I jumped into making one of these, and the topic was, you guessed it, yellow. So the color yellow, light and summer, some of my most painted subjects for sure, more specifically what yellow means to you and how you apply it in your creations. That was the topic of the exhibition. So where did I ever use any of these on my own creations that wasn't some commission, wasn't made for someone else, wasn't fan art? Well, I do have my character, Bubbles. See, Bubbles was first featured in a 2024 video I made during Pride Month, when I turned some Pride flags into Frankensteinian monsters, and Bubbles was one of them. Back then, they all were just random, once-appearing little characters whose names were literally made as jokes, but then I grabbed some of these that exist together in one universe, and during 2025 I started working on my own comic that features them as the characters, and now even Bubbles gets to have a proper story. For the course I recently attended, I finished a 13 pages long sample that featured Bubbles in total of 2 pages, but if I'll ever get to finish chapter 1, then chapter 2 will have Bubbles as the main character. So who is Bubbles? Why is this yellow creature floating in the ocean looking at an octopus for some reason? Let me open your veins and dose you with some of my lore of my character while you can watch me create this piece. And yes, this will be one of those kinds of videos, so I suggest you draw along or something, unless you're playing Subnautica in your other monitor while YouTube just autoplays. Hello there, hey. It's still playing, are you listening? Hey, my comic takes place in a world where Victor Frankenstein was a pioneer of science and impacted the world literally so much that the Victorian age was named after him, and the Frankensteinian monsters in my story are also called Victorians, partially because I like to be pretentious and confusing in favor of cool world building. Eventually, after the creation of Victorians was very profitable, you know, creating more workers from the bodies of the dead and a lot of other kinds of authoritarian manipulation later, Victorians became a special underclass until they slowly earned their place of being called and treated like a human, at least on paper. Then comes the idea that came directly from the inspiration for the design of Bubbles, the intersex pride flag. Without going into much details of how this really works in my world, people profiting from them wanted to create excuses to continue making more people out of dead bodies, and eventually a law was implemented that circumvents the need of people having to consent to their bodies being turned into Victorians before they die. The new law made it mandatory for every dead minor's body to be used at an attempt to create a new Victorian, which still has a very low success rate, so dead children in this world are forced to be turned into Victorians, and child Victorians are forced to be created against their own will, all of it under the lie of not giving up on precious material left behind by those poor little kids when they inconveniently died before joining the workforce. Obviously, this is based on both on the way intersex children are often corrected by medical institutions without their consent, after children in general are created also without their consent, which is a concept you might have heard about if you know anything about antinatalism, and also they are forced into being whatever the establishment wants them to be, once again without them being asked at all. But don't worry yet, it gets worse. Bubbles was one of those children, but they had the fortune or misfortune of not ending up in an orphanage like two other characters of my story, Violet and Sunshine, who both grew up in the orphanage after being abandoned by the parents of their donors. Bubbles was something special, something even more exploitative than most. Let me introduce you to the idea of the designer monsters. Yeah, this is exactly as grim as it sounds. Rich parents not wanting to just adopt any orphan kid like some commoners and not wanting to settle for a regular Victorian kid either can request or choose from the many custom-made and aesthetically altered premium children in order to show the world how no amount of money can stand in the way of their perfect family. Bubbles started out like most Victorians, one mostly intact dead body that had enough trauma to no longer be alive and needed some extra parts to fix up the face and the chest area along with some stab wounds scattered around the body. So after some stitching, the only thing left to do was altering the color of the skin in the entire body into a lemon yellow and some reflective implants into the eyeballs to hide the middle of the iris to create a brand new designer monster inspired by the blue ring octopus. Well, one would assume that once some parents are willing to spend a fortune on the brainchild of a premium monster designer, they will sure be the parents this child needs for their chance at life. Foreshadowing, foreshadowing, foreshadowing. While the consent of the former donors is no longer required for alterations, the consent of the created person to later do anything to their own body is obviously questioned without any authoritarian ideas lurking in the minds of the people who do, meaning such things as the chosen name of Bubbles, along with their gender identity and personal life choices, were immediately dismissed by their adoptive parents. Partially this rejection and partially the effects of the trauma of being a custom-made token child built from the body parts of children led Bubbles to slowly but surely develop very serious mental health issues that were obviously blamed on everything else but the real causes and were unmet with the slightest amount of empathy and care. Until of course the flashback sequence of Stitches Chapter 2, which will release around 2096-7, but that is a story to be told some other time. Aside from all the issues, Bubbles has always been a great admirer of nature, especially the sea and mountains. They really like to swim and hike, which corresponds with their other passion, which is photography. See, the idea came after I made some previous pictures of them that look more like staged photos, and in this little fictional universe, every piece that exists was made by my other character Sunshine, so these ones were made as a collaboration between the two, using photos taken by Bubbles as the base, including self-photography and like other pictures of wildlife and scenery. The one in this video is more of a fantasy picture, not just from the upscaled octopus, but with Bubbles being underwater so casually without any equipment and meeting that blue-ringed octopus is in a symbolic way. But what is up with that octopus then? So Bubbles suffers from a condition called haphephobia, the fear and repulsion from touching other people, which combined with Bubbles having autism often leads to them reacting very badly to people trying to touch them. Meanwhile, the blue-ringed octopus is famous for videos of people finding a juvenile and immediately picking it up, not remembering that if anything in nature is so colorful, it's because it has some form of poison, and these little creatures can kill an adult human if they bite, which is exactly why Bubbles is not touching this animal and just admires it from a safe distance in the water. Also, yes, the octopus is rather big compared to how big it should be, and I'm sure that they never just float like that so far from the bottom of the ocean, so at least I never saw this behavior in any videos I managed to find of this creature, but like all the others, this piece of Bubbles is not reality, but reality filtered through the work of Sunshine and more idealized and composed than nature itself tends to be. Only after starting the picture with the exact idea of having the octopus cast little shadowy light rays underwater, I realized if I add the shadow of the creature onto Bubbles, similar to how I did it with the fish ones, that will almost look like a little anatomical heart-shaped shadow on the chest of Bubbles, accompanying the heart-shaped necklace that was made by their found sibling named Violet. That will look like a little like symbolic connection between the creature and the person on the piece. While I originally didn't want to go so far with the environment, I just couldn't resist adding the ocean floor and a lot of corals and little fishes all around the place, and not just the traveling bunch of fishes into the back, but all these colorful ones. And looking back at it, the corals are a bit way too calculated and evenly paced, maybe only for my own eyes who is actively looking at them. Speaking so much about Bubbles, let's make actual physical bubbles for the scene. You can make a very simple brush in any program that adds bubbles for you by making a circle, cutting out the middle, blurring it, and then adding a highlight onto the bubble itself. And if you add a random rotation and size variety too, then they will look less uniform, and then you can hand place the bigger ones and paint in the smaller trails of little bubbles after applying a scatter effect too. I also added a transparency mask with a little gradient on it, so progressively it makes the bubbles go more transparent at the bottom of the piece, and I also manually removed many that were way too low, since you will always see more in the distance and they are more visible when exposed to more sunlight as well. Speaking of layer effects and similar tricks, at one point I did also add two effect layers, a darker and colder adjustment layer towards the bottom left of the composition, and a brighter glow-like adjustment that was meant to make the area around the exposed skin and the face more vibrant, but I ended up scrapping them. Around 3 years ago or something, I made that video about an American Horror Story fan art where I removed the Gaussian blur effect from the original background and instead hand painted the house in lower detail on purpose. So it's not a digital effect that is shown, but something entirely handmade by me with no decisions left to some random spot generator. You know, even when I made a custom brush for the bubbles and I used that to create them all, I also hand placed literally most of them. I cut out many that were in awkward places or like moved them around, and every single one of them was at the place where I wanted them to be. And when you do like an adjustment layer or a blur effect, it is more like a little chaos that is created for you, and you never really know where the exact spots and the exact colors and the exact shapes came from. And it's not like it's a really huge issue, like you can work like that. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing to do like that. I just decided that I don't want to create any of my works by using these, and you know, once again I tried out if it's gonna work on this piece, but I like really felt that I'm losing some of the connection and some of the aura of the piece by including this, so they ended up getting cut. This is overall how I felt about the adjustment layers. They added colors I didn't pick. I altered the different ones I chose by these layers, and they even modified the values too. That might not be the perfect and may even be closer to reality with the few adjustment layers. It is still out of my control and feels more like a late adjustment to a flawed piece rather than something actually intentional, so I only kept a little bit of the second layer on the octopus where I used it to make the sun exposed parts simply more vibrant and manually painted out the shadow areas, but the rest is untouched by the adjustment layers. Now, this is the point of the script where I realized I was just talking about whatever instead of following an outline, and I left out some important decisions. So when it comes to lighting effects, I'm much more happy with the reflective skin I managed to add to bubbles, where the shadow areas have two very distinct extra light sources, one being the reflection of the sky and the other the reflection of the sand and the ocean floor, most visible on the bent leg. It really feels the most pronounced there. At the topic of the limbs, aside from several repositions and rescaling, I'm surprisingly satisfied with them and how easily they came together. Maybe the feet are a bit rough as always. You know, if anyone ever wonders if I have a special interest towards feet, I can just show them any of the ones that I made so far, especially the super ugly one with the previous bubbles piece. I happen to have more finished pieces of bubbles than most of my characters. I did the first one with an AI image and I hated the stiffness and emotionless face. I just had to remake it just a few months later, and it became so much better than I made this one for a color palette challenge once, and I actually have a somewhat developed but unfinished one from earlier this year that is waiting to be continued. When I started out with the characters of the comic, for some time I really didn't know what I wanted Bubbles to be like, aside from being the youngest member of the Found family, somewhere around 21 years old, and that was before I had the eventual flashback sequence in my plans showing them at 17, 18 years old, before the Hafephobia story, before the Fool's designer monster storyline. Then as I was developing them further and just thinking about them a lot, I just started to really feel the connection to Bubbles too, and the same happened with Willow, who I also wasn't sure who they were for some time, aside from my werewolf character, who I really wanted to add to the story, but I just wasn't sure yet how and in what form I want to import this idea into them. I'm getting carried away with random things. Thinking back at the piece, now, a few days after I finished and submitted it, I would go over the area around the octopus and the octopus itself, possibly around the face and the upper arms with just 1 or 2 layers of glaze to add a bit more contrast and perhaps refine the light from the top so we would see the light rays more clearly, and I'd show more of the surface of the water too. And it's not so clear if this takes place very deep or not, which is not my intention. I wanted this to be a diveable distance without any gear, but I suppose you'd never want to do that in the ocean anyways, so it's more of a fantasy piece either way. Actually, only now as I'm writing this, I'm thinking about how much this reminds me of many works of Julie Bell, just with more androgyny and less super fit beauty ideals. More of a platonic look at a character more than anything else in a cute story with Bubbles meeting the octopus. But we're at the end of what I wanted to talk about. I spent about 17 hours on this piece, and I really need to go back and work on my comic and on a few other projects as well. But for today, I thank you very much for watching. Update: I actually recorded myself writing the script just to show it is indeed a scripted video, so you can look at it while I say this. Between me writing the script and recording it, we actually got the list of creators who got in on the exhibition, and my name was on the list alongside 37 other names, but during the submission period they didn't say how much the admission fee will be, and I assume that it will be a little honorary payment. We're talking about a little competition they announced, and there were allegedly a set of juries who picked which works will be displayed, so I was under the impression that they really want to just find random people who will submit something very much to this competition, like made something for this competition, and then we'll need to pay a little amount to get in. But it's like mostly the work that they do on their creation is what will matter. But then they sent the message about how much it will cost, and I literally laughed at them. The package where you will have your portrait and a link to your online presence alongside your work, that will be about the equivalent of half a month's worth of minimum wage at my location. About as much as I made with commissions once in an entire year. So I said, oh yeah, I see why you didn't disclose the price beforehand, and I passed on it. You know, the worst thing about it is knowing that with that price, obviously they picked 38 people in total, because they were expecting at most half of them are going to apply after seeing that, and I can't even confidently say that anyone honestly is interested in displaying my work. So but you know, it was still a cool experiment, and I would have possibly never created this exact piece without it. You can say that you could just pay that out, even if it's for the experience, but listen, I came from a working class family. I am financially conscious and conscious about the state of the rest of the world and my own community and what is to come, and I am mentally unable to justify paying that much. I calculated for the price, and I could print out at least 60 copies of my 13-page comic sample and hand them out to people, you know, once I give up my hikikomori vase. So I'd rather put this on the full screen and show it to those 3 people who will watch this video, because it literally means that much more to me. So that being said, thank you so much for watching. Have a nice day. Create something, even if it's a character you painted many times very similarly, since there's always delight to be had and improvements to be made. But most importantly, don't forget to have fun while doing that. Farewell. Also, I just butchered that entire paragraph ending, but I'm not gonna re-record it. Okay, I'm gonna re-record it because this is like the start of the video and you cannot just do that. Garbage truck, keep make noises, garbage truck, out my window, into your ears, your loud noises remains. 17 hours of this on this piece, 17 hours of this piece. I said off twice instead of on. Come on, fui! My voice is dead. My voice has perished. My voice went from being presentable into turning into Lucifer himself. What am I even recording anymore? Just go away. Video is over. Bye bye. Bye.